Everybody, welcome to the Better Sex Podcast. My name is Deborah Catt, and I am your shameless host for unfiltered conversations about sex and relationship. This show is about the many different ways that we do relationships. It's for people who want to have better sex and relationships on their terms. I truly believe that a sexy world creates a happy world. And as part of my mission, today I'm talking with Spirit. Spirit is a revolutionary somatic practitioner, incorporating elements of sensuality, sexuality, and spirituality, and the various realities to holistically obtain desired effects of eroticism and greater intimate relations with self and the world that surrounds us. Spirit has 30 years of experience as a spiritual advisor and counselor, along with community organizing, mentorship, prison, school, and community workshops on arts and the exploration of the other worlds for the liberation of all beings. Being an international touring freedom singer who has devoted songs that speak to liberation and assist the professional development of individuals as well as organizations, Spirit has a BA in psychology and communications. Spirit offers experiential sex and relationship guidance, working with parents, partners, and lovers, revolutionaries, and those seeking to improve their ever-growing, loving relations. Welcome, Spirit. I am so excited to have you as a guest here today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for reading that. I feel like the way you added your energy to it, I think I want to record this part and put it on my website. I never heard it sound so yummy. It just, I like that. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, that is the written piece. So I'm curious, what's your story? How did you get here?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that question. And again, thank you for allowing me to be in this space and to share space with you. I was thinking about it, because sometimes I'm a little long-winded, but to be real specific, I guess, and clear, I'm on Lenape territory, Staten Island. I was born in Manhattan Women's Hospital, raised in the Bronx. I became a priest in Yoruba or Lukumi practice at a very early age. I've been having ceremonies since I was in the belly of my mother. But the physicality and the practicality of my practice started around 11 years old, my journey in this path. And noticing also the connectivity to arts. I've been doing a lot of art work, mostly music, since I was young, around that same age, about 8 years old. And I find this connection with erotic energy, my chi, my creative zone has always been there. And it wasn't until recently I was able to explore this world of working with people in a more openly sexual and erotic space, outside of obviously the other eroticisms that exist and loves of life that we have, but talking specifically around sex. So I feel really comfortable in this realm because of my raising. But my mother raised me. I'm also a father that mothers. I'm a revolutionary matriarch. I'm a revolutionary. So yeah, I try to think of holistic liberation, and that has to incorporate sex. It has to have some arts involved. And for me, it has to also have, anything connected to the earth, Pachamama, any spirituality, anything that can open our senses so that we can get deeper into ourselves and other selves.
Man, I have chills when you start talking. So you've used a lot of words that I have an idea of what they might mean, but I really want to get what they mean to you. So revolutionary matriarch.
Yeah. So this is an ideology. This is a way of life, an embodying of being, a politic. Basically, what it says is that women, or those who identify as women, for 7,000 years plus, have been oppressed, right, by patriarchy, by those who identify as men or heterosexual men, or those who are just dominating the world, white supremacists, whatever you want to call it. There are many ways to call that. And being a revolutionary matriarch is one that, to me, is obviously there's matriarchy in there. The hyperness comes with the revolutionary part. So just thinking of a hyper form of feminism, right? But not in the way that we think that it should deal only with economics or the equality of that particular labor, but really like how to nurture men to be mothers. I think there's a missing component on not just having obviously women's rights, but there's something that men need to embody, and those who identify as men, in how to be more nurturing, how to be less domineering in that particular field of colonization. And to us, when we study in our revolutionary groups and our groups that we work in, we find that one of the oldest oppression has been women. So we honor women in saying that for men, us who identify as men, that we not need to just stand in the picket lines and hold up signs and write petitions and say, yeah, we're with you. But we also need to wash the dishes, do the laundry, raise the children, do all the labor that has been so-called attributed only to women, and sometimes that has oppressed women throughout our lifetimes. So sharing the labor, sharing the love. I take care of my two little children 24/7 pretty much. And my partner does her thing. She goes to work and we kind of switch our roles. We play with our roles. It also means diving into our queerness, right? Like who we are as a people, respecting and embracing our feminine energy, as well as our masculine energy together in this kind of yin yang zone. So there's a lot with revolutionary matriarchy. And I know some people are afraid of the word revolution, but sometimes we feel like we have to hit people upside the head and say, it's revolution. It's sex, it's liberation, it's fun, it's good. Sometimes we have to push a little bit. So it's hopefully people are not afraid of the word and understand the energy of just trying to evolve and to make something a little bit better or sustainable for not only our family structures, but humanity at large, and for hopefully the earth as well.
Man, there's a lot to unpack now. So one of the things that really caught my eye in our conversation, well, first of all, I'm really curious, like, how do you see, like, mommy energy and daddy energy as being different?
I don't feel that it should be different. I think it doesn't have to be different. I think what we're working with are constructs, right? Like the social conditioning that has been placed on us from other institutions or governments, the assignment of what is to be the man, quote unquote, or the daddy or the father, being obviously that has been broken down over years, the working sole proprietor, right? The provider. Where we know in other societies, especially towards the East, is actually the mothers that are the ones that are the providers, right? The mothers are the matriarchs. And still even here, we have there's a lot of bravado and machismo and stuff, but we all know that we're raised by our mothers, and most of the times it's the women that are helping us out anyway. We just don't acknowledge it, right? So we're like, behind every man there's a good woman, but that's not it. They're always with us. We're together, we're side by side. But what I see different is that we don't really embody that, right? Because of the social conditioning and because of the media and everything that we see, there tends to be this excuse for a hyper masculinity, for this dominance over or this overpowering of women. And I'm not talking about in the bedroom, because that's nice. We can play those roles. That's always great. I'm talking about just in the world of, of economics, of jobs, of respect, of organizational structures, of opportunities, even positions, right? And hopefully as a people, we're evolving beyond that. But I think daddy energy is really important. Mommy energy is definitely important. And if you can embody that, my mother was my father, so I'm not opposed to even single parenting or no parenting, whatever the case may be. What we're speaking of is more the constructs that confine us and put us in a box to not allow us to be a daddy that wants to mommy, or a daddy that should be mommying, right? Like, it's not just enough for you to provide money or that kind of quote unquote stability. Like, we need to care for our children the way our mothers care for us when we were raised in such a loving and nurturing way. And I think there's a connection with that with our society in a larger conversation. But like, why are we so hyper militarization? Why are we so hyper conquering and taking over land and, this kind of respect? I feel if we take the mommy energy more and embrace that more, we can quell a little bit or balance out the hyper patriarchy that exists. And again, I think the masculine energy is definitely needed and necessary in spaces, and it can be a beautiful thing. It's just when the constructs only focus on the masculine as the most dominant or the one that is to be looked to sign the check, to, make the check, to whatever the case is, I think that becomes problematic. So, I embrace my daddy all the time. My lover calls me, my children call me, so I'm with it. And I have no problem when somebody calls me mommy, and when they understand that I am in my mommy zone, and I'm cooking and I'm cleaning and I'm doing all the things that quote unquote mommies were societally thought to be the ones doing, right? I think men need to grow, evolve into a space of where they're actually embodying the mommy energy too.
I love that. As you're talking, one of the things that you said is kind of being side by side. And I think that's such an important concept. A lot of times when I work with couples, it's like they're face to face. And that's not great for a relationship. But when they can stand side by side, or they can stand back to back, it creates a whole different experience, even if it's just within their personal dynamic, but then the way that they show up in their community is a whole different thing. So I'm super curious about your it sounds like spirit has been a part of your life since you were a young kid. And that sounds like a really extraordinary experience. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you. I've when I was younger, I was trying to figure out being an artist, right? I was trying to figure what's a name, and I had this opportunity to be signed to a production company. And when I saw my name on paper, at the time I was using Billy the Kid, Billy Blast, and I had little logos with 2 microphones swinging around. And I already felt like when I was 11, 12, that I was probably not going to keep that for the rest of my life. And I asked my mother, what other name could I use? And she said, well, you're a child of the spirit, so why don't you just call yourself Spirit Child? And I was like, that's perfect. It's I love spirit. Spirit is a thing to me. What it means, it's very elusive, right? It can be good, it can be bad, it can be however it's designed to fit. It's very fluid, and not in this angelic or Catholic way of thinking of spirit, but in this really universal way of understanding or overstanding spirit. So I was really happy with that because I didn't want to be put in any boxes. One day I may want to write some songs about the government. Some days I want to write songs about making love and not be restricted to just the government or politics, or I want to talk about ice cream, like whatever I feel like I want to write about. And I feel like spirit can kind of flow in and out of those spaces. And in regards to pronouns, a lot of times these days, with respect to spaces that actually advocate and ask for in solidarity, I will express that I'm fluid, and I go by he, she, they, them, either, whatever you feel. I would say something here, but I really love I want to say, I don't know what the profanity thing is here, but there was a friend of mine has a really good way of saying, you can call me this, you can call me that, you can call me anything. You can even call me da-da-da-da, right? Like, uh-huh. Way. I resonate with that as well. I'm through my political awakenings and identification politically, I've been identifying more and more as a maroon, right? Or a cimarron, somebody who prior to slavery, also during the times of slavery and resistance, would go to the dismal swamps, would not conform to the plantation. So these are people who are either finding refuge from slavery or who have never been enslaved, autonomous communities, quilombos throughout the world, right? Venezuela, Brazil, etc. And what I've noticed in my study of those communities, that the roles of being a maroon are also very fluid. They remind me of spirit. So if anything, when I speak in spaces, I usually say I'm a maroon, right? So maroon is like, I can be a man, woman, whatever the case is. Also spirit is also very fluid in that particular way. However, again, if people need that identification, which I respect, for people to feel in a safer space to know that others recognize the struggle of pronouns and the struggle of not being seen, then I definitely express to people that I'm pretty fluid with my my design in that way. So they can call me she, he, they, them. I'm okay with it all. So I hope that kind of answers a little bit, but it comes from
it does. And what I really appreciate about that, so I have to be honest, like, over the last year, I've come into a lot more empathy and openness with pronouns. And, because at first I was like, what? And, at first my kind of like snarky little part of me would introduce myself as she, her, and bitch, or she, her, and yes, mistress.
Okay. Yeah.
And, since then, I've really kind of gotten that what is important about pronouns is the idea that all of you is welcome, or at least that's the way I think about it, right? Mm-hmm. It's that people need, as you said earlier, to feel like who they are is welcome in this space. Mm-hmm. And is that kind of your understanding of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I in spaces that I organize with, definitely. I mean, it's interesting because I don't necessarily, because we're breaking and we're trying to go beyond constructs, right? So politically, I also have a little, like, on my other sides of my days, there's a lot of internal debates that we have in regards to how much attention we give to certain things and what we want people to see or receive from us. And I'm very much like, yeah, if I'm queer, like I'm like, I can say I'm queer, like I can, but then it's like, well, where are you defined, right? I can, like for a long time, I've been using woman with an X, just to politically not think of woman coming from man, because that's the way I was raised politically to understand the struggle of of certain people like not advocating for the continuing dominance of patriarchy. And then I found out, not too long ago, that that's also problematic for some people who in the trans community who feel that the X is singling out. So these things are always evolving, like Latino, Latinx. I come from an era of Malcolm Xing out something that you want to also celebrate and honor, an unknown factor, but not like a disrespect. So I'm always in spaces that they're very different. So I just kind of feel the spaces out where people are with their sensitivity or where they are with their sexuality. So I just find like spirit does help me in that neutrality zone. Like, this is really like, I'm like, this is who I am. But if you want to know who I like and what I do, we can have another conversation.
I love that. That's so good. So who I am, this is who I am. And if you want to know who I like, that's a whole nother conversation. I love that. That's so good. Mm-hmm. So speaking, one of the conversations I'm really interested in having with you is about masculinity and specifically about Black masculinity. It's such it's a topic that doesn't really get unpacked very much. And so I'm really happy to have this conversation with you, especially because you really have a view that I have not heard before.
Yeah, thanks. I think my introduction to all that, well, I'm Puerto Rican and Jamaican, right? So just to give some context, as far as my raising or childhood, and what that means for me and the communities that I'm a part of, is that we all know that there's a hyper machismo when it comes to those that identify as men or those who embody the kind of more masculine male energy physically, that we're kind of conditioned and spoiled into this being catered to, being seen as, like from a very young age, oh, the little boy, like it starts very young. I grew up with all women in my family. Predominantly, I feel like 80% of my family is women. And I was raised by, a lot of my older cousins, and I would see them basically do what my mother would do for me. And they were put on this role at a role early on, 13 years old, 10, 11, and sometimes even younger, of caring for the younger male, right? Or even the younger female, right? Quote unquote. And you would see like they're expected to nurture the young, but the young boys are not expected to do that. We can go outside and play basketball, and we can go out and do whatever we want to do. We don't have to necessarily have or be stuck to that responsibility of helping our mothers raise the children. Now, obviously, I'm generalizing because in some structures you have no choice and you have to do that. But the way I was raised, there was a lot of excuses for my masculinity, a lot of excuses for, cook for him, he's a boy, do the laundry, he's a boy, like it was this thing of like expected for our women or identified women, cousins and sisters and stuff to just do that. So that's my introduction, right? And then also I'm a child of hip hop. So you take that machismo, that masculinity, and then you throw it in the context of a rebellious form of music that culturally was seen as a genre to pretty much be a culture of resistance against white patriarchy and white supremacy, and like before hip hop is now, right? Like I'm talking about the era where how it came to be, and this kind of rebellious, where men were seen to be like you had to prove your macho-ness. There's a lot of gangster mentality within the music, a lot of hyper boistering and prepostering and like all this stuff. So that energy is there, right? And it's reflective of the Black, brown, and indigenous communities in which hip hop comes from. So I was very seasoned with all of that. and that was like decades, right? And still in my life. But it was a very big part of my life. And, I working in prisons, I'm seeing that as well, right? So I'm adding that when I'm like in my early 20s. Now I'm going into the prison industrial complex where I'm seeing, oh my goodness, this is even more hyper than I thought it was just on the outside culturally. This need to prove ourselves or to dominate each other, to degrade women, to just be better, so competitive, just all of the toxicity that comes with that, right? So as an organizer, as a cousin, as a son, in so many aspects, as an artist, so many aspects of my life was just infused with all of this, right? My papa was a Rolling Stone, right? Like my actual example of my life. He has so many children from different women. I wasn't raised by him. I mean, the cliche that it's just not so cliche because it exists. It's real. It's disgusting, right? That thing that constantly happens into 2022, and probably even beyond, because this is just where we're at. So I made a commitment to kind of walk a path of, if I can't change things in this lifetime, I definitely have the power and ability to change or make better decisions, right? Especially having children. And I want them to see that it's okay to be non-conforming. It's okay to be neutral. It's okay to, my son, for a very long time, I mean, he still has long hair and people still call him a girl. And he's 6 years old and he looks at me a lot of times these days because we've been talking about it so much. He's like, he'll smile. He'll be like, oh, they call me a girl. I'm like, yeah. He doesn't get offended, where, a lot of other boys would, and we have these conversations about that. And sometimes he wants to have French braids in his hair. And I'm brushing their hair all the time and I can't braid, but I do the best I can, so I'm like, whatever you want to do, whatever. He wears tutus, and then I'll support him in wearing tutus too. Like, I feel like I got more queer since I have my children. So I feel like I got in these days, but it was such a gift to not just preach and go out there and organize and blah, blah, but to really embody what it means to quell or to balance out this hyper masculinity from the classrooms. I also teach in schools, to just traveling, being in Europe and all these spaces where, as a Black man, people look at me differently. I mean, it's just like, it is what it is. And,
so
and I have to, yeah.
I'm curious, like what do you think people are thinking when they see you as a Black man?
It depends where I'm at. But I can start with the police because that's one of the main experiences growing up that I've definitely felt the wrath of, or at least the judgment. And also, to be very clear, I don't say this all the time, but I think is important because I think I'm about breaking boxes and things. And people who are listening out there, you hear revolution like 500 times. My mother and my father were police officers, right? So like, I mean, it's not the way people think it is, right? And I'm also raised by Black Panthers and people who revolutionized. It's in our communities, it's very fluid. It's not a black and white, literally, situation. I have family members and my cousins who are, lighter than you, right? Like, I mean, I have like my spectrum and my array in my family is ridiculous, from sexuality to ethnicity, race, or whatever you want to define as complexion. I just wanted to just put that out there, right? But when I see police officers, I do feel and understand, and I felt the response of being a threat. I've walked the streets when I was younger, not these days. Sometimes I feel it these days, but usually there's something about age that changes that a bit, where I think people kind of calm down a bit and don't think I'm going to wild out or do something crazy with them. But people across the street, when I'm walking, white woman, white man, Black women, you know what I'm saying? And sometimes even other Black men too. Like there's a thing of like trying to give space and if you see something that's threatening to move aside. So I see people as maybe at first being conditioned to the stereotypes and to the news and the media of what Black, especially as a man, could do or what it is. And then I've seen people relax more when we have conversations, or, you know, I'm always smiling. So I'm like, you know, people kind of like relax a little bit when we actually engage and I say hi or how you doing. But there is a skepticism of engagement. And I think that comes obviously from our society. So I feel exactly what the governments and institutions are afraid of embodied in people. I can feel that heavy, right? Where, get in the back of the bus or, the darker you are, the less you're heard in the classroom, right? All those things that have been passed down. These communities need more surveilling and monitoring and police presence. So let's go precincts here and there and occupy this neighborhood with these particular cameras. All of those things, those judgments go to the people. So that's what I feel. I feel that on a daily basis when I interact with particular people in different communities. I'm on Staten Island right now, so people always talk to me like I was crazy moving out here because I'm from the Bronx. And, this is known as police territory. Like most
I was just going to say, as a West Coaster, I'm going to need you to break that down.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to. Yeah, I'm going to explain. Yeah, I know. Even people in New York sometimes don't know this, but a lot of people have this stereotype about Staten Island that all of the police officers live on Staten Island. Staten Island is known to be predominantly Italian, Irish, and more affluent, right? Peoples on this particular borough. So where you think of an exodus from like the 70s or so, Polish communities, Eastern European moving from the Bronx, moving more to like Staten Island and New Jersey, right? So you'll have like different communities, and not to say that there's no Black people or brown people on Staten Island. I mean, we're everywhere, but there is more of a presence. And Staten Island also has the more homey vibe, and that's where people kind of live their American dream per se. And if you think of the American dream, you think of kind of like throughout America, this Midwest or throughout just this mentality of, I'm going to fence up my home and I'm going to move further away from the derelicts or the people that are that cause problems, right? So like I'm going more to the suburbs, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the kind of attitude that you have prevailing on this island, and people move with that amount of prejudice. It shows. With the amount of police brutality and presence and the lack of compassion that police officers have to the communities, but also to the people, right? Like sometimes they don't knock on your door and ask you to lower the music. They're quicker to call the police, and that's something that we as a people in the communities, we just try to change. But that's where this hypermasculinity becomes problematic, right? Because then you get outside forces to dictate a narrative that you've been fed, and to perpetuate this stigma. And now you're thinking this person's going to cause harm to you, and then the harm comes because now you're calling in outside forces to deal with somebody. Just got to be more neighborly, and now they're arrested, or they have an altercation with the police where they weren't having that before, and then things rile up and boil up because we're not going to sit here and just allow police officers to come to our community. We're going to scream about it. We're going to voice our opinion. We're going to protest that, right? So then it becomes a clash. I'm all about like breaking it from the root. Right? Like I don't blame the person who is who's a racist or who has a racist mentality. I try to figure out how to heal that. Right? What are they dealing with inside? What experiences have they had to cause them to fear me as a Black man, or to have this kind of stereotype of me. And then there's other cases where, where like I think we mentioned before, where I think, then there's the stereotypes of the hypersexuality being a Black male. And I'm like, I'm cool with that.
It's interesting because this is something that, like, we don't always talk about. We don't always talk about the fact that, like, there is a stereotype of Black men being hypersexual and hyper, physically well endowed, and just that's a really fascinating image to sort of put with the all of the other pieces that go with it. And I'm curious, so I'm curious how that stereotype either enhances your sexuality or takes away from that.
Yeah, and I now I'm thinking of the people that will be listening to this, right? So I'm like, it depends on how deep you want to go, right? Because I say jokingly about the hypersexuality that also comes with that comes through times of slavery too, right? Like, I mean, so like it depends if people want to go really deep and unpack these things. So it affects it in a way of like, yeah, it feels good, but then psychologically, knowing where that comes from and having a relationship with a white person, right? These things play out in the bedroom, right? Whether we know it or not, right? We have a genetic memory. And if we don't acknowledge the reality that, there have been men who have been lynched, castrated, right? I'm thinking of Emmett Till, a young man, just for whistling at a white woman, right? Or so allegedly whistling at a white woman, because we all found out later that didn't even happen. And this myth, right? And there's a problem there, and we can responsibly role play that problem, as I'm finding during this work. There's a lot of men that I'm working with, a lot of Black men that I work with, who are like, I have fetish, I have these fantasies of white women, and they have shame with that, right? And I think we can work, but we have to go to the root of it. We can't just overlook the truth that yes, it's a power, right? To be seen as a sexually powerful and just hyper, sexual being, and it's also exhausting, and it's also problematic, and sometimes there's this toxicity that comes there, right? Like that plays out if we don't acknowledge it, right?
Right.
If we acknowledge it responsibly, then I think we can play with that energy and we can work with it. I mean, just think of, I'm just going to be really like, I don't know how raw, I'm going to be really raw real quick, so we think of like the Holocaust, right? And we think of how will we romanticize or play out the Holocaust sexually? It's hard to even fathom that, right? And I'm thinking of this right now, just talking to you. That is how I think we should also approach delicately, in some respects and spaces, the African Holocaust, and how we sometimes romanticize or over-sexualize the image of that dynamic, right? If we can't touch that first one that I just mentioned, why societally is it okay for us to kind of embrace and play irresponsibly sometimes without unpacking the psychological effects of that? I don't think everyone who comes into a relationship should just think about that all the time, but at some point there is we can't pretend that we're living in this world that there's no coincidence why certain people are attracted to each other, right? And we can overcome, again, those stereotypes, stigmas, all that stuff, if we're honest with each other and our bodies and ourselves. But I think it's, for me, it plays out I'm polyamorous, right? And when I started learning more and more of my like indigenous roots or my spiritual connected roots, right, with my religion and my spiritual practice and where it comes from in Nigeria and like Cuba as well, and the islands, like how people have lived and existed, I'm more comfortable as a polyamorous person. It's hard for me to be monogamous, and I trace that to my root. It's kind of like, if you're, I'm not good with the blood, but one of my partners used to say, I'm a B type, so I'm supposed to eat fish. I'm supposed to live by the sea. I don't know, O or B, whatever one it is, but she followed her DNA, right? And she was like, what's the best food that I'm supposed to eat? If you know who you are and where you come from, I think responsibly you can engage in different narratives without it psychologically messing you up moving forward. It'll cause more harm. And we can play with that again. I think sexually, I love the energy of being hypersexual and at times, aggressive and hyper masculine. I play it out in the bedroom all the time. I love it, right? And I'm very careful that it doesn't leave the bedroom into a persona that looks like a conquistador, a colonizer, somebody who wants to oppress someone. Because those are energies that we have to be very careful how we play them out. And sometimes people in interracial relationships may not be looking at that, right? They may not be thinking of the long-term effects or even the historical or historical narrative effects of that.
Oh my God, that's like a whole nother conversation. So good, so juicy. So we are getting to the end of our time here today. Yes. And I just really want to take a moment and pause and just, if there's one thing that you want people to walk away from this conversation, what might that be?
If there's one thing, I heard conversation. And what was it before that?
Yeah, so if there's one thing that you want people to walk away from this conversation knowing or hearing, what might that be?
I would love for people, despite the some of the things that was mentioned today, and there's many more, to take a risk and to love unconditionally, passionately, and responsibly, and irresponsibly if there's consensus. Little consent you got going on there. That's cool. I would love people to not feel, and I think there's been a theme that we've been talking about with my name and like with just ideology and all that stuff, just to not box each other in, right? Really to, and people say that a lot of times, but I mean like embody liberation. And embodying liberation, embracing the possibility that your energy level might be on E, empty, on spirituality. So bring it up a little bit. How can we do that? Your energy level on your sexuality might be E. So let's bring that up a little bit. Your energy level on, despite what people may say, I'm not political, I don't see color, blah, blah, blah. Your energy level on politics and revolution could be on E. How can we bring that up a little bit? And how does all of this bring you a greater satisfaction when interacting in your relations with your partner, your family, your friends? How does that impact the world around you when you're more of a holistic being, a more responsible, liberated human? So I think that's what I would love people to just contemplate and think of. Where in their life is there a little bit low energy, and what do they need to do if they want to capture that energy and not be afraid, no matter your level or entry point, or your skin color, or whoever you are, not to be afraid to embrace that, embody the unknown, and then move to a greater joy, which is pleasure, right? Like if you have pleasure, just freedom, like real freedom.
Ah, So good. Man. All right. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for your incredible embodiment of spirit and all of the different pieces that you bring to this conversation. I am so thrilled to have you as a guest here at the Better Sex podcast. And I know that we will be putting your links in the show notes. So please, please, please look up this amazing being, creature, person, human. Again, it has been my honor to have this incredible conversation with Spirit. And I just want to thank you all for listening to the Better Sex podcast. And I want to invite you to hop on my ride for creating a happier, better, sexier world. And one of the ways that you can do that is by hitting subscribe, by following, by writing a comment and on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. And again, this is Deborah of the Better Sex podcast, wishing you better sex.